Conservative Party of BC leadership job interview.
I'm looking at the trajectory this province is on, and it's going nowhere good. We require drastic change.
We need to be a serious, credible option for people.
So if we can wrap that message around a message of hope and optimism and vision and show where we're going to take this place, then we will win the next election.
And it's that old expression, what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. That's what we're doing right now. And that doesn't work for British Columbians.
This is not an entry-level job. This is a job for someone who can be focused, disciplined, and who understands both politics and business.
Yeah. Let's get on to DRIPA. I'm looking forward to it.
Hello, I'm Stuart McNish, and you're listening to Conversations Live. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series addressing the big issues of our time. For each episode, we bring together subject matter experts for a deep conversation designed to provide you with information that helps you make more informed decisions. I hope you enjoy it.
The 5 remaining candidates for the job of leader of the Conservative Party of BC join me and Vancouver Sun columnist Vaughn Palmer tonight for Special Conversations Live. The objective of tonight is to learn more about the way in which each of these candidates think and what they'll do and how they will govern. What's their view of the party under their leadership? What will it be, and why do they believe that that is a vision that voters will support in a general election? We're also going to dig into the hottest topic on the political screen today, DRIPA, followed by a discussion about the economy, and time permitting, we'll also delve into the intertangled mix of the drug crisis, involuntary care, and healthcare delivery. Today we come to you from Kamkamilai, the land of many maples. These are the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations who have lived on and continue to call these lands home. OCM. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series that seeks to advance our understanding of the big issues of our times. Our goal is to share ideas and insights that help each of us gain a greater understanding of our communities, our province, and our country. There are many organizations that help us to host Conversations Live. Without them, we would not be able to bring these events to you, in person or online. And it's thanks to those supporting organizations that believe in engaged citizenry. You will see the logos and names of these companies scroll across the bottom of the screen throughout the evening. I can't thank them enough, because without them I couldn't do this. So I'm going to name them all. Our hosting sponsors are RBC, KPMG, and the ICBA, the Independent Contractors Business Association. Our annual sponsors are Digital, BD Developments, Polygon, Stem Cell Technologies, Helijet, Rennie & Co., Pacific Salmon Foundation, and Fortis BC. And our sponsors, supporting sponsors are BCIT, Falkirk, and OPI. And we work in association with Mario Canseco of Research Co. and with Playbook, your go-to market communications and government relations partners. Our media partner is the Vancouver Sun. Can't thank them enough. Thank you, Harold Monroe. Harold's in the audience with us tonight. We're streaming live on the Vancouver Sun, and live streaming services are provided by Oh Boy Productions. As I say, without their generous support, this program would not be possible. To our panel. Our panelists are, next to me, Peter Milobar. To his right, Kerry-Lynne Findlay. To her right is Caroline Elliott. Sitting to her right is Iain Black. To his right, Yuri Fulmer. And way down there at the other end is Vancouver Sun columnist Vaughn Palmer. So, just so you know, this is not a formal debate. There are no opening remarks from the candidates. When responding to my question, the candidates will have 2 minutes to answer. There will be a timer that will be up on the screen. You'll be able to see when it's counting down. And following each round of answers, Vaughn Palmer, at his discretion, not mandatory, but at his discretion, will seek further clarification and further insights from candidates that he chooses. And you'll have 90 seconds to respond to him. Once we exhaust that first topic, we'll move on to the next topic, and the same pattern will repeat itself. Now, just before we go to the first question, here is Mario Canseco with a poll that we asked him to commission.
As the Conservative Party of British Columbia heads into the final stages of its leadership race, BC's residents remain concerned about three key matters. For 3 in 10, housing, homelessness, and poverty is the most important issue. The economy and jobs is second, followed by healthcare and crime. BC Conservative voters in 2024 place more emphasis on the economy than on housing and healthcare, and are more likely to be worried about public safety than the average resident. Sizable proportions of British Columbians think this is a time for the official opposition to focus primarily on the salient issues and set aside all culture wars. More than 3 in 4 want the BC Conservatives to get the government to invest more on healthcare and to foster economic growth in all areas of BC. There is also majority support for developing a housing policy that rivals what the current government is doing, as well as getting more pipelines built and more energy projects off the ground. Support for the official opposition taking steps to ban transgender women from taking part in women's sports leagues competitions is up by 7 points in 2025 to 49%. 3 other possible courses of action are even more contentious: ending SOGI inclusive education, repealing the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, or DRIPA, and reverting the ban on plastic straws. Compared to last year, we have slightly fewer British Columbians who think the Conservative Party of BC is a free enterprise coalition, and slightly more who regard the next leader of the party as a premier in waiting. A majority of residents think BC needs a center-right party to serve as an alternative to the BC New Democratic Party and the BC Conservatives, something to ponder at a time when the Liberal brand has more clout across Canada than in 2024. Fewer than 2 in 5 British Columbians voice support for mergers involving the BC Conservatives and 1BC, the BC Conservatives and Centre BC, or the BC Conservatives, Centre BC, and 1BC. However, the possibility of these unions is seen positively by majorities of BC Conservative voters in the last election, with 61% favoring a deal with 1BC. When British Columbians are asked to ponder which party the BC Conservatives need to resemble in the future, no option gets the backing of more than 1 in 5 respondents. The most favored choices are the current Federal Liberal Party or the current Federal Conservative Party. Among BC Conservative voters in 2024, the results are different. More than 2 in 5 want this party to resemble the Federal Conservatives, while 1 in 5 want it to look like the old Federal Progressive Conservatives. Only 9%, fewer than 1 in 10 past voters, look at the defunct BC Liberals as a source of inspiration. For Conversations Live, I'm Mario Canseco from ResearchGo.
Thank you, Mario. Now to the panel. Iain, I'm going to start with you. Remember, this is a job interview. Why do you want this job, and what's the party going to look like under your leadership? Do you believe that that vision that you have is going to create enough interest with voters to support you in a general election?
So there's 3 questions in there. Let me start with the first one. Why do I want this job? Well, I didn't think I'd be back in politics. I thought my time in politics was done. But it was the landscape of the incredible challenges that exist, not just in Canada, but particularly in British Columbia, that has me back here, walking away from my role as CEO of companies to really take everything I've learned over the last 25 to 30 years and apply it to the challenges of the moment. The ability to understand how to lead people, how to get people focused on a challenge and achieve something together that they couldn't possibly do as individuals. That understanding of broad public policy, especially economic public policy, because I believe if you don't get the economy sorted out at the moment, the rest won't matter. And the third is that broader understanding of what it means to sit at the cabinet table and the Treasury Board table, to actually build what is now a $98 billion budget, the mechanics of governing, and understanding not just where the Premier's office is, but what it does. To me, this is the challenge of the moment, and I believe I'm well suited to achieve it. The key reasons why, or the key picture I have for the BC Conservative Party under my leadership is one that draws the very different pockets of conservatism that have appeared over the last couple of decades. I think of kind of traditional, if you will, progressive conservatives, the Brian Mulroney conservatives of my parents' generation. I think of civil libertarians, people who are just interested in keeping government out of their lives, out of my religion, out of my sexuality, like just not my thing. And I think of the frustrated 35 to 40-year-olds right now, right down to college grads who are looking around and saying, whatever this thing called government is, it ain't working for me. Because I can't buy a house, I can't get a doctor, I can't, that my children are coming home from school reflecting a value system that's not consistent with what I necessarily want around my kitchen table. And that gathering of people, I believe, can find commonality under the BC Conservative banner. And I think we have to make sure that we're making this tent as big as we can. I look back at the days of W.A.C. Bennett and Bill Bennett, who between them governed this province for 35 odd years, best part of 35 years. They didn't do that by identifying who fits in and who doesn't. They did that by saying, we believe in basic conservative values. We believe in a free enterprise approach to running the economy and giving people all the freedom possible to live their lives the way they want. And by doing that, and by keeping that door open and making that tent as big as possible, they governed for the best part of 35 years. It's my intent to emulate that welcome mat and that approach when Premier of British Columbia.
Kerry-Lynne, same question to you, of course.
The reason I put my name forward for this is because I'm very worried about my home and your home, our province. Our province is in trouble. Our province is on the precipice of a cliff that we're already looking over the edge of. We're $183 billion and growing in debt with a $13.3 billion deficit. We have an ideologue, a socialist ideologue as our premier, who is signing side deals with Indigenous groups that he says he hasn't even read. This affects the other 95% of us. My purpose here is to govern for all British Columbians. We can have economic partnerships, we need more of them. But we cannot have a situation like we have right now, where we are mired in non-transparency, in deals that are made in secret. We cannot continue this way. And we need to fight. And I agree with Iain, we need experience. This is not an entry-level job. This is a job for someone who can be focused, disciplined, and who understands both politics and business. I have been at the highest levels of the national government as Minister of National Revenue and on Treasury Board nationally. And we lowered taxes, we cut red tape, because I'm the only one up here who is governed as a conservative, and that matters. We need to get our province back on track, but we need focus, discipline, and hard work to do it. And our party will be unified. I am a unifier. I have the most MLAs endorsing me of anyone up here. I'm already doing that work and will continue to do that work for my home, for your home, and for a province we all love.
Thank you. Yuri, down to you. And Vaughn, I will come to you once we've gone through everybody, okay? I see that you're anxious. You're going, I got to jump in there now. I like, hang on. But oh yeah, already. Yuri.
Oh, thank you. And I apologize. I am losing my voice. My children think it's a wonderful thing that their dad's losing his voice. But for everybody else, I apologize. It's a little bit husky, and it means I'm not going to be able to shout at anybody tonight. So there's good news in that, too. Look, I never aspired to be in politics. I have a business I adore. I have 2 small children that are the loves of my life. And I have community work that drives me every day. I'm running because the fundamental deal between taxpayers and its government is broken. And the deal was always this. The deal was we paid our taxes as taxpayers, and you were allowed to complain about it. You were allowed to pay them last minute. You were allowed to pay them grudgingly, but we all paid our taxes. And in return, your government was there when you needed it. So if you got hurt, or you were having a baby, or it was towards the end of your life, and you needed to go to hospital, there was a great hospital. It was open. The emergency room was open. Doctors were taking patients. You could find a family doctor. If you needed a specialist, you could find a specialist. If you needed surgery, you could find surgery. You know, the police kept the streets safe for us. If you called 911, the police showed up, they arrested criminals, they took them to jail. if you were ready to educate your children in school, there was a great school in your community. Maybe they even gave out letter grades. And they taught a curriculum that involved reading, writing, and arithmetic. They got kids ready to be great adults in our society. So that was the deal. We paid our taxes. The government did all those things for us. The government fostered a good free enterprise economy that created good family supporting jobs for people, so only one of mum or dad had to go to work. And the only thing that's still true in that deal I listed is that we're paying our taxes. Every other part of that deal between British Columbian taxpayers and its government is fundamentally broken. And that's why I'm running. And what I want to bring is the skills that I've learned in 30 years of being self-employed in business. I've owned and operated my own business in this province. I've had 2,000-3,000 employees rely on the decisions I make in order to support their families. And I've been a community volunteer for 30 years, helping communities lift themselves up, feeding kids that were hungry, helping kids get ready for school, helping seniors live in their own homes. So it's that combination of fiscal responsibility, an understanding of how the economy works, signing the front side of people's paychecks, but also helping community raise themselves up. That's what I want to bring to this job, and that's why I'm running for the best job in the province.
Thanks, Yuri. Kerry-Lynne.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your answers so far. So the reason for me, why I'm doing this, why I'm sort of in this job application process in the first place is actually really simple. I have 2 young kids. My son is 6. My daughter's 8, and I obviously care very, very deeply about their future. And I am looking at the trajectory this province is on, and it's going nowhere good. We require drastic change to create the opportunities that they deserve when they enter into that working world. My fear, as a lifelong born and raised British Columbian, is that they're going to reach a point in their lives where they're not going to be able to make the same choices I made, where they're forced to go elsewhere for the opportunities that they need in their lives to start their family, to start their first business, to get their first real job. And we're seeing it happen already. 70,000 British Columbians left this province last year for opportunities elsewhere. I don't want to be the next mom in line saying goodbye to my kids as they head to another jurisdiction for those opportunities. That's fundamentally it for me. And when I look around at what British Columbia has, it's absolute abundance of natural resources. It's incredible people, skilled, talented, hardworking people. It's businesses that are based here in BC, our access to global markets overseas and down south. Other jurisdictions would kill for what we have, and there is nothing standing in the way of us being the place in Canada where everyone is flocking to for their opportunities, other than government policy. So I'm doing this to turn those things around. I'm doing this because I understand, and Kerry-Lynne, I would agree with you, it's not an entry-level job, and I'm thrilled that there's not a single entry-level applicant on this stage, because you know what we need? We need someone who understands the ideology that underlies all the bad decision-making we've seen by the NDP, an ideology that is permeated into every single aspect of the public sector. It's an ideology that is pushing activism in our schools. It's an ideology that is pushing the social justice concept of equity over the conservative principle of equality of opportunity. We don't think those lead to education, to economic outcomes. That leads to high taxes. That leads to big government. This ideology that they hold on the cultural side leads to those economic realities. A radical land back agenda that leads in policy to things like DRIPA, things like the Cowichan decision and the lack of defense of private property rights that is killing our economy right now. The social justice approach to law and order in this province that is leading to a level of social disorder that is shutting down small businesses in every corner of this province. These things are one and the same. It's not either or, it's both. And if we don't recognize that fundamental ideology underlying all of it, we may win some battles, we will never win the war.
Thank you, Kerry-Lynne. And Peter.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's great to be here. And I agree, experience does matter. And I'm the only one in this race that actually has current, relevant, timely experience. I was literally in the legislature yesterday watching David Eby try to tap dance around very hard-hitting questions, and Nikki Sharma, questions to do with DRIPA, questions to do with co-governance, and the pushback that we've been trying to provide on a daily basis. Now, I've been in the legislature when we were only a 1 seat away from forming government back in 2017 and watched as the NDP clung to power with a Green coalition. That was not good for the province, but the NDP didn't go away. It wasn't an easy victory for us. In fact, we dropped seats. And now we see that we came back in this last election, very close to forming government, and only 1 seat away again, 2 seats away. If anyone in this crowd or any party member thinks that the NDP are not going to put up a fight in this next election, they're kidding themselves. They are not just handing the keys of government over to the BC Conservatives. We need to be a serious, credible option for people. Someone that is at the helm needs to actually be projecting that and actually have a plan to actually get our province headed in the right direction. A fiscal plan, a plan around crime and safety, a plan around healthcare, a plan that actually will deliver private sector economy being unleashed in this province, because we've created 4 public sector jobs to every 1 private sector jobs over the last 8 years. That is not sustainable. It should be the reverse. We need to get this province moving again. And we need to do it with honesty and integrity. And I'll just close with this. It is, with all due respect to Iain's opening line, his newfound passion for being pulled back into politics wasn't this race. It was 9 months ago when he decided to run in the federal election that he wasn't successful in. And same with Yuri. You don't want it to be a politician, yet you tried in 2024. Experience matters, electoral success matters, and that is ultimately what we need to send to our membership, is a plan and the experience and the ability to actually win and govern in this province.
Well, you've all done a good job of explaining why you want the job. Vaughn, I'm sure you want more details.
Well, I'm going to ask everybody to answer this in their own way. First time the New Democrats took power in British Columbia, it took the non-NDP parties in the province. They call themselves whatever they want. They're not the NDP is what they are. And it took them 3 years and 3 months, and they were back in power. They pulled it together that quickly. They recruited, under Bill Bennett, from across the political spectrum. Conservatives, Liberals, people made fun of them, but they got back in power in 3 years and 3 months. The second time the NDP took that operation, social credit lasted 16 years in power. That's pretty good. The second time the NDP got in, it took 10 years. It took a lot of effort. It was messy. There was reform, and there was the Progressive Democratic Alliance. They were never really sure where they were on the political spectrum. And there was the BC Liberals, who many people were embarrassed to call themselves that, and all of that. But they did manage to get back into power. But it took 10 years of NDP government. Well, here we are at the 9-year mark, and I'd like to hear, when you talk about what you would do with the leadership of this party, how would you specifically, learning the lessons from the past, deal with that one challenge, which is to put together the vehicle that can win the next provincial election?
Let's start with you, Kerry-Lynne.
Lucky me. Look, I think we need to do what I've already been doing, which is forming a broad range of support across the different, the very broad range of views that make up this party. So as an example, I was very honored to have the endorsement of Harman Bangu, one of the founding figures in the revival of the modern conservative movement, along with the endorsement of Brian Tepper and Christina Lowen, who are part of that as well. But on the other side, I attracted the endorsements, and I'm very honored to have those as well, from Darrell Jones, former, from what I would describe as sort of the free enterprise world of the party. Gordon Campbell as well, of course, who led that, the BC Liberal revival, as you know. Maybe it wasn't quite a revival. It was the onset into BC politics. So that's the kind of broad range of support we need to attract. I'm already doing that work, and I think it's crucially important. The other thing I would say, though, is appealing to people on a values and principles basis, as opposed to purely like the partisan banner basis. And the reason I say that is because I think that there is a huge alignment between conservative values and the values that everyday British Columbians hold. And those values are things like, everyday British Columbians understand you cannot just spend beyond your means and not expect a big bill at the end of the month with a lot of interest you have to pay on that. And they know that because they run their household budgets. Everyday British Columbians understand that you can't hand out free drugs in perpetuity and expect people to get well and into recovery. They understand that violent reoffenders don't belong in neighborhoods, they belong in jail. These are the kind of the values, principles, kinds of things that we can show to the public. We can say, this is what we stand for. If you agree, join us. Not closing doors based on former political involvement. Some of the people I'm most excited to have at my events are people who say, I've never been involved in politics before, but I like what you're saying and I want to be part of it. That's happening with me all the time. There's a remarkable number of women who are joining my campaign for that reason as well. I'm thrilled to have their support, and that's the kind of coalition we need to build. Thank you.
So how do you characterize exactly what that coalition is? Are you leaning further to the right along the conservative spectrum, or are you moving more towards a big tent middleist party?
I think it's opening the door based on those values to anyone who wants to join. And this may shock you, but I have people coming to my campaign events who will say, I'm a former NDP voter, but I'm just so sick of having the NDP's ideology shoved down my throat that I'm just done with it. I can't watch the future of this province be ruined by a party that doesn't seem to care anything about outcomes and only their ideology. So I have a huge range of people coming out and joining me. I have people obviously from right of center as well, as you might expect, who are just absolutely sick of things like the NDP's land back agenda, which I've fought for years and years. So that's the kind of thing we need to do, is just open the doors, say, I don't care who you used to vote for. If you're on board, jump on. You're welcome here, and we'll take this province in a better direction.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
Peter?
you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my journey here has been interesting. The ink was barely dry on the agreement that Kerry-Lynne negotiated with the BC Conservatives to collapse BC United, and my phone rang, and it was John Rustad asking me to run for the BC Conservatives to bring some stability and experience into the caucus room and through the election, and ultimately with the hope that we would be governing. Obviously, we came close, but it didn't quite work. But I've been, from that day forward, building relationships in the existing caucus. Let's remember, we have 38 caucus members. Those are relationships that take time to build. It's a very brand new caucus. We will have to add another 15 to 20 very talented people into that mix as well to continue to move forward. But you also build a party, a successful party, in an election by actually rebuilding the trust and rebuilding the relationships that we have with our riding associations. That is how you get the volunteers. That is how you get the buy-in. That is how you actually go from riding to riding to riding. Counteract vote splits, not by conceding seats in certain ridings and not running a full slate. It's by making sure you build out your riding associations to actually have a fully functioning, real party. And that includes welcoming all. I have said this all the way through. I do not care how you vote federally. No one will ever accuse Danielle Smith of not being a conservative. She also is well known for taking the federal government behind the woodshed from time to time, and she's working with a federal Liberal Prime Minister to build a pipeline I fully support. That is what you need a Premier and a Cabinet to do, fully defend British Columbia against what Ottawa wants to do when it's not in BC's interest, and also work with Ottawa when it is in BC's interest. And that does not involve how you vote in a general election. It's about those shared views and ideals and principles that you might have around healthcare and education and crime and safety and a private sector economy thriving in British Columbia.
Vaughn's chomping at the bit. He wants to ask you another question.
No, I
okay.
want to hear.
Okay.
I want to hear everybody's answer on this.
All right, Yuri.
So it's a great question, and obviously one dear to my heart, because I've actually built a vehicle to solve for this problem. So, what I've heard on stage is my colleagues bluntly saying that the force of their wonderful personality is going to draw everybody back into some big blue tent. I think that's in the situation we're in today. I think, unfortunately, that doesn't acknowledge the reality that is 1BC. And Vaughn, mentioned a couple of times when we've had a second party on the right of centre, we have lost elections. Right? We lost elections in the 70s. We lost elections in the 90s. We lost elections in the 2010s. We lost the last election because we split the vote on the right. So we can ignore the fact 1BC is polling 10%. We can ignore the fact that they exist. We can ignore the fact that we hear in every community around British Columbia the 1BC has a real base and a real following. We can ignore that, or we can work with it and understand that a coalition on the right makes sense. And so I've come from a business background. Maybe I'm, new to politics, but I seem to manage to work this out. I would say as well, there are a number of people on this stage whose campaigns had also reached out to Dallas Brody and tried to do a deal with 1BC and were unsuccessful. So let's be clear, Dallas Brody and 1BC will only do this deal with a Yuri Fulmer-led Conservative Party, and it will ensure that we defeat the NDP. And the highest goal of anybody on this stage has got to be to defeat the NDP. It is not to be the leader. It is not to be Premier. The highest goal is to defeat the NDP and restore sanity to British Columbia. And if we have to make a little compromise to do that, and to acknowledge that One BC is polling at 10% and could result in the NDP being re-elected, I think that I've done the pragmatic thing, I've done the realistic thing, and I've done the thing that will guarantee a Conservative government.
Thanks, Yuri. Kerry?
I don't agree. I believe that we need to bring a vision, a broad, bold, exciting vision of hope and prosperity back to British Columbia. And I believe that will bring people from all backgrounds into our tent. And it isn't about where you voted before. I supported the BC Liberals. They were our coalition compromise against the NDP. I mean, I grew up in a small town with a dad who was an electrician, and he would say, I'm a SOCRED, I'm a free enterpriser. And he was very proud of that. And, you know, as one of 6 kids working my way through school and everything, this is what I knew was we weren't NDP. That's what I knew. And, but, you know, the very first campaign I ever worked on was Carol's husband, Art Phillips. I was a teenager, I was 19, and I helped him run in Vancouver Centre. It's not about that. It's about where we're headed. What is the future? It's really not about the past. And, you know, with all due respect to Mr. Fulmer, and I've also talked to Dallas, I talked to her on an ongoing basis, but I didn't have the authority, and neither did he, to make a deal in writing saying that we were going to give up 5 seats. Which 5 seats? Where? All in Surrey? All in the Okanagan? Which Conservatives are going to be asked to step aside for that deal? Because she's going to want to run in Conservative ridings. I believe that the reason you see the kind of polling results you do right now is because there is no leader of the Conservative Party of BC. If we have a strong leader with a bold vision, people are going to want to vote for us. And Margaret Thatcher said, you know, first you make the argument, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. That's what we need to do, to show that a Conservative government works and our vision for the future is all-inclusive. And I too have had NDP voters from the past say, would you know, let us in? And I said, absolutely. You like what we're saying? Come on board. That is unifying. That is a strong, bold future vision. And that's where we need to go.
Thank you. And Iain, I'll let you wrap up on this question. And then Vaughn, let us know whether or not you want a little further explanation. Iain.
So as I've traveled the province, this question is, I think we're 72 or 73 of these meet and greet open houses that we've done now. And this question is asked every time. How are you going to win? And how are you going to make sure that we have a message that is appealing to those who aren't necessarily card-carrying BC Conservatives? And my answer is typically evolves around this concept of values, because I actually believe you can win an election. I believe you can win an election within, first of all, you can unite our party, but you can also win a general election by staying true to Conservative principles and remember that they are shared. We don't have a copyright on some of these things. And I think that's an important place to start. So when you think about what are some of our values that we believe in? Well, we believe in as small a government as is required to deliver the sacrosanct services of healthcare and education. We believe that. We believe that you're better with your tax dollars than government is, so we try to keep our taxes as low as possible. We believe that it's government's job to pave the way and then get out of the way. So that speaks to regulation. Don't tell me how to run my business and do my job. If it's not impacting public safety or consumer protection, the regulation probably shouldn't exist, right? We believe those types of things. And that when you, like the 7 or 8 of them, but when you stick to those and you recognize and you look around the room, you realize that there are people who probably voted federally liberal in the last election who probably believe some of that stuff too. And you're also getting a lot of small business owners, call them blue-collar conservatives if you want, but a lot of people who used to be in the domain of the NDP who are standing back and going, these guys are making it too tough for me to run my family business. I'm not interested in what they're selling anymore. And therein you start seeing the pattern of people saying, I relate to those value systems. And then it's our job as political leaders to take those value systems and wrap a narrative around it. Call it an election platform, if you will. And one that it's got a vision of to where you want to take things, not just to reflect the cultural reality of the moment, but also the economic realities, the kitchen table issues. Like, nobody rolls out of bed every morning, except maybe the people on this stage, who think to themselves, I'm a conservative, or roll out of bed and go, I'm an NDP, or I'm a federal liberal. No, what they're thinking is, I got to get the kids to school, I got to pay my bills at the end of the month, I got aging parents that I'm concerned about, and I'm not sure where my next mortgage payment's coming from. We get caught up in a lot of this stuff to our own peril. So if we can wrap that message around a message of hope and optimism and vision and show where we're going to take this place, then we will win the next election, and we will draw people to us who either didn't vote for us last time or didn't vote at all.
So, Vaughn, you satisfied with these answers, or do you want more?
That's great.
Yeah.
Let's get on to DRIPA. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I find myself wanting to know more. How are you going to undo this, and how are you going to undo that? You talk about these regulations, and if we don't need them, well, how are we going to get rid of them? I mean, these are questions that linger in my mind, but you're absolutely right. DRIPA. It is, without a doubt, the number one issue on the top of minds of everyone. So what is your plan, and how do you hope to execute it? Because you may say this is what I want to do. It's a very, very tricky environment that we're in. Kerry-Lynne, I'll start with you.
Yes, I agree. It's a very tricky environment that we're in. And we're all traveling around the province right now, and I'm sure everyone's experience is the same as mine, that this is the number one topic on people's minds, because they understand now that the Cowichan decision, just because it was in a courtroom in Richmond, it's a BC Supreme Court decision, so this applies to the whole province, and everyone is concerned. The lack of precision of language, which as a lawyer I hate, makes everybody feel very uncertain about what does Aboriginal governance mean? What do future Aboriginal partnerships look like? What is happening in our province? And we have two levels of government that are making it more difficult. This is where, again, experience comes in. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a politician, thank goodness. But on this stage, I am the only one who is a lawyer. But as part of my law practice, I dealt in Aboriginal land issues for many years. And I was part of the litigation team that went to the Supreme Court of Canada on Musqueam versus Glass. Year 2000, you can look it up. And that was a very difficult time because of that dispute, we had a situation in Musqueam where all homeowners lost all equity in their homes and yet had their property taxes triple and quadruple because the taxing authority was changed from the city of Vancouver to Musqueam, and because there was a dispute. And every home, 75, affecting over 200 people, ended up being defendants in a lawsuit that I was very much a part of. So I've lived it, I've litigated it, I understand it, and I've understood it for a long time. I've negotiated in this area, in Kelowna, in Shuswap, in other parts of the province. And this is not a new issue. It's just a issue that's been churning and boiling and now has come to a head because both the provincial and federal governments have abandoned the field. They are not speaking up for the 95% of us who are non-Indigenous. We should govern for all British Columbians. Yes, have partnerships, absolutely. But we cannot ignore the majority, always in favor of a minority. And this has to change. And it's not just DRIPA. It is where the language of DRIPA has been put into legislation in all areas, into our natural resources, our mining sector in particular.
Okay, Kerry-Lynne.
This is important to fight it.
I got to ask you, though, will you repeal DRIPA?
Well, I thought I'd said that about 100,000 times. Yes.
Okay.
I think everyone here has said that.
Peter.
Thank you. Absolutely, DRIPA needs to be repealed. And I'll say this. I know many of you in this room, and I've been in meetings with many of you in this room, and you know I'm a pretty direct person. So I prefer when people are direct with me. And so frankly, when I saw a fundraising email come out from Team Black that talked about a candidate with divided loyalties around DRIPA, just say what you mean. My wife and my children are Indigenous. My wife I married in 1993, and our 3 grown children are Indigenous. If you're going to fundraise off it, just be honest about it. Doesn't change my position on DRIPA. When I campaigned in 2024, I talked to John Rustad about the position of DRIPA and the BC Conservatives. We knew right then, before I said yes to running, that repealing DRIPA was going to be part of the platform. I agreed after talking with my family about that. Because believe it or not all Indigenous people think the exact same. And there are people in the Indigenous communities that agree that DRIPA is not working. DRIPA is actually an impediment to reconciliation. DRIPA is actually an impediment to getting this province and projects moving forward. So we have to repeal it. We have to recognize there are still constitutional obligations of the Crown. We cannot simply pretend that Indigenous nations no longer exist, that they don't have constitutional rights, but we can get back to working within a framework that actually can deliver projects, as we saw pre-DRIPA, and get projects moving forward. Industry's already there. You know who isn't there? The province, because they're always moving the goalposts when it comes to consultation timelines and what is actually needed to make a decision. It's the province that's been the problem. It's EB that's created this mess. I have a way to go into those rooms with credibility and authenticity and actually get projects moving forward again, because we will, under my leadership, actually have firm, clear guidelines to properly deal with our constitutional obligations while making sure projects are moving forward in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Peter. Yuri?
Yeah, thank you. Look, Peter and I ran in 2024 on repealing DRIPA when that was not a popular thing to say out loud. And the pendulum has swung pretty dramatically in the last 18 months since that election. And I think what British Columbians are looking for today, and what I hear, so I've been into all 93 ridings. I'm on meeting number 262 around the province. What I hear from British Columbians is we're not asking you to audition to be, Attorney General, Yuri. We're asking you to audition to be the leader of our province and to stand up for us, to defend our private property rights, and to defend us in our province and the use of resources in our province, and defend prosperity for all British Columbians. And that's why I've been very clear with a fairly specific plan. And we launched last week, and I announced it at the debate last week, that we would stop the voluntary transfer of land and money to Indigenous communities so that we can actually come to a table and negotiate from a position of equality. The challenge we have today is we're asking Indigenous communities, while we are giving land and resources to them, we're saying, come to the negotiating table and bargain with us. Well, I know from being in business, if you're handing things out and you're saying negotiate in good faith, you don't get the other side negotiating in good faith. And it's that old expression, what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. That's what we're doing right now. And that doesn't work for British Columbians. They're saying stop. They're saying time out on that. And they're saying we need a premier who wants to stand up for Crown land, that's 95% of our province. They want us to stand up for the 95% of people of British Columbia who are not Indigenous. And they want us to find a solution to this challenge. And they want us to find a solution in the context of fairness. And right now we don't have that context of fairness. And I'm the only person who's proposing that we actually come to that position of fairness where we can actually negotiate with a position that we're going to get an outcome that works for all British Columbians.
Thank you, Yuri. Iain?
It's astonishing to me that we're having conversations right now that I never thought we'd have, which is people having discussions in environments like this, but over their kitchen tables and over with their friends about whether they actually own their own properties. And that private property rights are actually up for discussion at the moment, and which is, there's not a Western country in the world that doesn't have private property rights enshrined in their constitution except ours, which is an interesting piece of trivia, but it's a very difficult one at the moment. But the phenomena of the DRIPA conversation has got two elements to it. One is the very cultural element to it and some of the sense of fairness that people are now talking about in the broader conversation of Indigenous relations. But it's also the economic one, and the one that's got the most attention because, frankly, the welcome mat of investment has been yanked away from this province. Until this issue is settled, you are seeing dollars stop on our shores before they hit us, and they're stopping before they come over the Rocky Mountains on the other side. So in my view, there's three things that need to happen. First of all, like everyone on the stage, I don't think we've got a choice. DRIPA must be repealed. There's no doubt about it. And the economic or the enabling legislation around it, known as the Interpretations Act, the changes were made by the NDP on that one. They added Section 8.1. That also needs to be repealed because that enables DRIPA across the rest of government. But I also believe that we have to approach the other premiers in this country. And we have to engage them in a conversation around reopening Section 35 of our Constitution, which specifically deals with Indigenous rights and titles. And using the lawyer speak that is required, add in a phrase that says, except private property rights. Now, will that solve every problem? No. There are many legitimate points that have been made on the stage up until this point around some of the broader cultural, where do we go from here at a relationship level, but that will at least ensure, for the most part, that we will never, ever, ever again find ourselves having this conversation about whether we actually own the property underneath our homes or the homes themselves. So I don't think there's a perfect solution, but I think that takes us well down the path, and then we can start regaining the trust with the First Nations people going forward, because we've got to do deals to keep this province moving, and we need to find a way to get there.
Thank you, Iain. Caroline?
Thank you. I'm pleased to see agreement that DRIPA is the single biggest existential issue facing this province. And I don't think I'm overstating it when I say that handing 200 plus Indigenous groups potentially veto power over virtually the entirety of the landmass makes British Columbia, frankly, ungovernable. It makes our investment climate unworkable. And I'm happy that everyone on the stage is agreeing with that. My concern, as David Eby is finding out right now as he tries merely to suspend DRIPA, not repeal it, as we're all agreeing we need to do, that there is going to be a lot of resistance. It's going to be politically extremely difficult to do this. There's one person on the stage who is speaking up when it was hard about this issue. One person on the stage who was fighting the NDP's radical land back agenda when it was very unpopular to do so. That was me. While I was doing that, others on the stage were voting for DRIPA. They were plastering their business websites with land acknowledgements. They were encouraging the adoption of UNDRIP's principles into the corporate sector, and so on. If you were not against DRIPA when it was politically hard to be against it, I find it hard to believe you're going to have the political will when the time comes to actually repeal it in full. That is what absolutely has got to happen. DRIPA is threatening our economy, our prosperity, and our future opportunities for our kids. It is incredibly undemocratic because we're taking increasingly decisions over public land and resources and placing them into the hands of small governing bodies that the public does not elect. That's a big problem. That's my academic background, and I have a depth of knowledge there that I will go toe-to-toe with David Eby any day of the week. And finally, and most destructively, it is incredibly socially divisive. Categorizing British Columbians into different identity groups like uninvited guests and colonizers and settlers, the damage this government is doing to relationships between British Columbians is atrocious. And I will stand against that any day of the week. I will fight DRIPA, and I'll make sure that the repeal is done.
Thank you, Vaughn. Do you think...
I collect interesting press releases, and two of the most interesting ones this year. One was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, week ago Sunday, from the Premier's office saying that embargoed until 6 o'clock, we're bringing in the DRIPA suspension legislation next week. It's happening. You're embargoed, but it's going to happen. That was at 2 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, there's a different release. It's a 180-degree reversal. It's not happening at all. Now, you ask the Premier what happened between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, and he says, well, Nikki Sharma tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, boss, you know what? I think there might be a way through this thing. We could just get together and talk about it. I think what happened is the other piece of paper from that day, which is a very interesting statement to every member of the legislature from the Indigenous leadership in the province. Now, there have been some complaints that's been described in coverage as threats. But what they said was legal action, non-cooperation, and cooperative resistance, which sounds like a threat to me. So, day one of the next Conservative government, when it happens, if it happens, and I say day one for me is the legislature sitting, the writs are returned, it's the throne speech, and the throne speech, good evening, Your Honor, the throne speech says we're going to repeal DRIPA. And day two, collective resistance starts. Do you think it's likely? And how are you going to deal with it?
Peter, let's start with you.
Sure. I would deal with it the same way we were imploring the late John Horgan to deal with it when we had fires on the front steps of the legislature with the Wet'suwet'en protests happening. I was in the legislature for that. And I would point out that Mr. Horgan's approval ratings were never lower. And then COVID hit and everything changed. And then we were saying rule of law applies in British Columbia. And that holds true today. I stand by that then, I stand by it now. And with respect to what Kerry-Lynne said, she's right, it is going to be noisy. But no one has a market on that. It will be noisy no matter who repeals DRIPA. The key is actually repealing it though. The key is actually having a cabinet that is actually tasked with and held to account to make sure they're going through the various laws that have already started to be changed to make sure you're fully repealing DRIPA out. The key is to make sure, as I've done literally just last week, trying to get Nikki Sharma to actually acknowledge in question period that in fact she did even instruct the Premier to back off, because the Premier has said it came from Nikki Sharma. Nikki Sharma has never said that. She won't say it in question period, and she's been asked multiple times. Myself, Trevor Halford, Scott McInnes, we've all been asking. They were asked again today. They were asked yesterday. So I've been having a front row seat to this. I know exactly what's coming our way on this. It doesn't mean it doesn't still have to happen. Of course it has to happen. If we're not prepared to have a little bit of turbulence on this, then what's the point of even having this conversation? So absolutely it will be disruptive. Hopefully not for the long term. Hopefully other nations that do want projects to get moving forward and see that their own economic well-being is being impacted by these protests and by projects being delayed will also have a voice. But you cannot have co-governance in this province. And the Premier refuses to acknowledge it, and Terry TG is saying they already have it. And so that is a big problem. And you have to get back to the Crown being the final decision maker. And DRIPA, with Section 7 in particular, creates the environment where the Crown is no longer the final decision maker. And when you talk to the Premier about even amending DRIPA, he does not want to remove Section 7. If you don't remove Section 7, there's no point even talking about amendments. And so that is the fundamental problem that we're seeing play out time over time over time. And that is why we voted against the Haida Agreement when it came forward, because by then we realized the true ramifications of DRIPA. That is why we pushed back on the Land Act changes before the last election and got David Eby to back down on those, long before the merger even happened. And so yes, I did, as Kerry-Lynne said, voted in 2019 for DRIPA. Everyone's cracked the Hansard Code, next we're going to crack the Da Vinci Code, I guess. But the reality is, post that vote, as we saw it start to be implemented and the real ramifications, my track record's pretty clear about pushing back on any and every time we've had that opportunity to do that.
Kerry-Lynne, as Peter pointed out, it's not going to just be noisy, it's going to be very messy because law is now involved and DRIPA impacts any attempt to moderate, repeal, or adjust DRIPA. How do you do it?
It is so telling in terms of how problematic that law is that David Eby's finding himself in a position where he potentially cannot change the law because of the law. I've called it the DRIPA 22. It's a big problem. It should never have been signed into law. It's one of the reasons why people on the stage should never have supported it in government, in business, and so on. It's a massive problem. And in fact, people who say that they ran under repealing DRIPA in the last election should maybe read the platform where it says our commitment to British Columbians is to honor UNDRIP as it was intended. That's the language in the platform. I was against UNDRIP. I always have been, always will be. Now, to how you manage the mess, though, that's actually the question. Look, we have a responsibility to British Columbians to push through. And anywhere we can collaborate, anywhere where we can work with First Nations and explain to them, look, this is anti-prosperity. We want prosperity for you. You're not going to get that with DRIPA. Let's find those avenues for conversation because no one in BC does well under DRIPA. Not First Nations and not British Columbians. When you're pushing prosperity out of this province, when you're undermining democratic principles, and when you're dividing society, no one wins. So I want to have that conversation. I'm happy to. I have those conversations already. But so I don't want this to be any messier than it has to be. but I have no, illusions about just how difficult it will be. We have to proceed with this. We have to repeal DRIPA. We have to enforce the law in terms of any consequences that are raised out there in the public. But I also think it is going to take courage. And this is back to that first point. If you didn't have the courage to speak up when it was politically difficult to do so, are you going to have the courage to follow through with a full repeal when it gets difficult to do so again?
Yuri, it's going to be very difficult, and if we want certainty in this province and we want to attract investment, just simply repealing DRIPA is going to present numerous changes. What's your plan?
So the first part of the question that Vaughn asked was around, do you have the intestinal fortitude to stand up to protest, I think was the basis of the question. And so 100%. I think one of the things we've got to consider in this is what happens if we don't do it? And I think if you want to worry about civil unrest, having people have their private property rights under threat for a prolonged amount of time, if you don't think that's going to result in incredible civil unrest in our society, I think we're being very naive. So absolutely repealing DRIPA. I mean, we're all saying the same thing. We're all saying it needs to be repealed. So absolutely we need to do that. We're all going to need the intestinal fortitude to do it. We're all going to need to stand on the steps of the legislature and be aware that there are going to be protests and there are going to be people who don't agree with us, as the Premier's finding out. But we need to do it for British Columbians. It's the right thing to do. It's the thing British Columbians are demanding that we do. But I think we need to understand that if we don't do it expeditiously, that we are going to have people in British Columbia doing whatever they need to do to defend their private property rights. And I'd agree with one of the other speakers, I can't remember who it was before, who said, this is one of the most divisive things we've seen in our province. We're pitting Indigenous people against non-Indigenous people, and that's wrong. It's got to stop. And what we can't have is non-Indigenous people taking the fight literally and wanting to fight. And that's what I'm worried about in our society, and that's why we need to take action. And not just take action, but we need to do it incredibly quickly.
Kerry-Lynne?
Well, I think it's going to take strength, courage, calm, intelligence, and conviction. In October of 2014, I was in a caucus meeting when a gunman stormed the House of Commons and shots rang out. If I can live through that ordeal, I can live through this. And the point here is that you have to project calm and clarity. And I agree with Peter that, of course, not all Indigenous are homogeneous in their thinking. And not all of them support DRIPA as it is now. Many do. We have to understand, however, that we are here to lead all British Columbians, and we are here to provide a hope and a vision for the future. And if we don't do that, where is BC going to end up? We live in the most beautiful province, and people are leaving it because it's unaffordable, it's unworkable, because our resources are left in the ground, all for an ideology. We have something like $800,000 in resource wealth per capita, and yet we leave it all in the ground for an ideology. That's very expensive. And it's not what I hear when I go around the province. People want good paying jobs. They want to have a future here in British Columbia, and I believe Conservatives and a Findlay government will give them that hope again. This is a challenge, but we can face it. And we will deal with it as it unfolds, with clarity, with vision, with hard work, with discipline. And, I took advanced negotiation at Harvard, and I can tell you the things I learned there I've used my whole life in law and politics. You need knowledge as well.
Thank you. Iain?
Well, I think we've established that nobody's getting a gold star for repealing DRIPA. But the real question, paraphrasing if I may, is then what? What are you going to do? Right? And it's not just the veiled threats in the written stuff that was delivered by the First Nations leaders over the weekend. It's make the assumption that you've got 5,000 people on the front steps of the legislature the next day. Fair bet, right? Who do you want in that Premier's office taking the phone calls? Think of the skills and the experience that are going to be needed in that moment. And the 5, maybe 10, maybe 25 years of experience of leading, of judgment, of being held accountable for your decisions that in that moment are put to the test. When the CEOs of the major industries of our province are phoning in and saying, I can't get our guys into the woods, I can't get them to the mine sites, I can't get them to the oil and gas fields. The labor leaders are calling and saying, I can't get my guys on the site to work, they're not making any money. The municipal leaders are phoning and saying our towns are at a standstill because the economies are ground to a halt. That is the scenario that starts to play itself out here. So think about that very carefully when you're thinking about this leadership competition and who would be the best person to be taking those phone calls, because they will come. Now, as for what you might do with it in that particular moment, there's a couple of things I think you need to do. You need to remember that there are 22,000 family supporting jobs that were involved in the 4 major projects of Site C, LNG, Canada, the Coastal GasLink, and the TMX expansion, right? All of those deals were done with First Nations, all of them. Right? So you've got to go back to the drawing board, get access to some of that Indigenous leadership and say, guide us through this. And one of the first phone calls I'd make would be to my friend Ellis Ross. And if you haven't seen his post on Facebook in the last 48 hours, look it up. That is a crystal clear understanding of a perspective that I think should be taken into account when moving forward on this. But it'll be relationships, it'll be patience, it'll be rebuilding trust, and frankly, it'll be navigating some very complex corporate issues that you need to make sure you got somebody in that office who understands it when the time comes.
Vaughn? Any follow-up?
Well, those are thorough answers. We'll see.
May you live in interesting times.
There's no need to ever make predictions in BC politics because what actually happens is always more interesting than you could imagine.
Very true. Well, of course, we cannot neglect the economy, a discussion about the economy. If we take a look at the economic performance of British Columbia over the last 4 or 5 years, we are stagnant at best. And the data, I believe, is being compiled to confirm that. We're not attracting investment. The regulatory process is like trying to wade through quicksand. I was at an event yesterday that I was moderating a panel with the Sustainable Energy Association. These are the people who are actually going out and creating solutions to address climate initiatives. And one of the panelists said, our company has built 700 solar projects in British Columbia, and now we're taking our eye off of British Columbia and moving to Texas because we can be approved in weeks versus years in British Columbia. So let's turn to the economy. Peter, I want to start with you.
Thank you. Well, the economy is a mess. As the finance critic for the last 4 years, I can tell you things are only getting worse, not better, every single year. And I think as conservatives, we want to hear honesty and we want to have true integrity behind what our economic plan is moving forward. We can't offer up solutions rooted in 2001 or 2005 thinking when it comes to taxation, because the world's changed a lot in the last 25 years. We have 40,000 people over the last 2 months that lost their jobs in British Columbia. Those 40,000 people, they want a job, not an income tax cut. They actually need a job to be able to have an income tax in the first place. What we need and what we've seen is that erosion of the private sector economy. And what we need to do is actually address the private sector economy in a way that makes it competitive again. We need the job creators to be able to actually create the jobs. That means getting the government out of the way of regulation and of overlap and of delay, but also making sure that any tax changes we get, we cannot offer up tax changes, and I saw Iain's tax plan. I can tell you as the finance critic, that's about a $25 billion deficit based on what we're currently at with the deficit if you layer that in. We're going in the wrong direction with that. We actually need to get our spending under control, do a 3 or 4% cut to spending, not closing hospitals, not closing schools, finding those efficiencies to save $3 or $4 billion and leverage that $3 or $4 billion into the job creators, to remove the PST on equipment, to get the investment saying, okay, we can come to BC. Regulation has gone down. The second piece is that our taxation is competitive now. We're not going to be impacted. We're going to be rewarded by actually expanding, by reinvesting in our businesses, by expanding our businesses. And that is how you actually have the third piece of all of this, which is actually get our youth feeling like they have hope in British Columbia again, to the 70,000 that left British Columbia. If someone's at work and they feel like their boss is always downsizing and not investing back in the business, what do they feel like when they get home from work that day? If they get home from work and their boss is talking about expansion plans, about new equipment coming in, about some other piece that's going to come, what's that mindset? I can get ahead in the job. I can get promoted. I can go manage the branch office. Maybe I'll start my own side business up. It isn't government that has to set that mindset. It's government that has to create the taxation structure and the regulatory structure that we can actually get out of the way and let the entrepreneurial spirit in BC grow again, just like it does in Alberta, and it should on this side of the Rockies as well.
Thanks, Peter. Yuri?
Yeah, obviously an issue very dear to my heart as the guy on the stage who's owned and operated a business around this province for 30 years. You know, I know what it means when a mill closes in a small town, because the spouse of somebody who just lost their job works for me. They're my customers. They come into our restaurants and they tell us that they don't have the money that they had yesterday, or they're worried the mill's going to close, so they're worried they're not going to have a job. They're worried about the future of their family. And you know, like, I honor that Iain came up with an incredibly large tax cut. You know, I don't think it's workable, but I honor the fact that he wants to make big, bold moves. And I, with respect, listened to Peter just now, and that sounds like a lot of minor incrementalism to me. Anytime somebody says to me 2, 3, 4%, you know, I kind of yawn a little bit. And you know, in my business, if managers come to me and say, Yuri, I'm going to grow the business by 2, 3% next year, or I'm going to cut expenses by 2, 3%, I tell them to go away and come back when they've found some ambition. And I think that's what we need in the Premier's office around this topic. We're going to need a Premier who has ambition for British Columbia, who has an ambition to make British Columbia the place in Canada everybody wants to come to do business. You know, we had that show, Dragon's Den, for years, and everybody aspired to be an entrepreneur. People wanted to go into business for themselves. People wanted to start a side business or a side hustle. And then we created a province at the end of the NDP, and to an extent under the Liberals before that, where we made regulations so onerous. And every year we came up with something that took 1% away from small business owners. And I hear it every day. Business owners who say, 10 years ago my margin was 15% and I was okay. And I've lost 1% a year, so today my margin is 5%, and I'm not sure it's worth it anymore. So I'm certainly not going to reinvest. If I can take my business out of the province or out of the country, I will. And people are now making those kind of decisions, and employees are living in the fear that the boss is going to make one of those decisions. So we need to create an environment where we turn the sign on the door of British Columbia from closed to open. And what the NDP's done is taken it from open, turned it to closed. They've pulled the blind down. They've pulled the shutters across. They've let the garbage build up in front of the store. And frankly, they've let homeless people sleep in front of the store. That's the province we have today. And it's not going to be solved by 2, 3, 4% changes. It's going to be solved by ambitious tax reform. It's going to be solved by ambitious spending cuts. And we're going to have to show the province what it means to be fiscally responsible. And I think small business, medium-sized business, and the biggest businesses in this province are all ready for a government who wants to be bold. Let's be bold.
Thank you, Yuri. Iain?
You forgot saying set the alarm. Yuri covered off the front end piece, which I mean, you and I agree on a lot of. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on a lot of this kind of stuff because we know what it's like to try to raise capital in this province. Back when the first .com, second .com boom were happening, I was a very, very young guy in my early 20s, and I could raise more money in Seattle over lunch than I could in British Columbia in 6 months. I couldn't do it, right? And then the government changed. And we cannot solve the magnitude of the problems we have in front of us by clipping around the edges. You've got a government right now that has doubled what it spent when they first came to office. The budget was about $50 billion. It's now zeroing in on $100 billion. Right? You have 40,000 people out of work, that's just a starting point. The rethinking that has to be done here is phenomenal. It's not just a tax cut that's required. It is also getting rid of all the regulations. One of the commitments we've made is remove all the regulations that have happened under this NTP government and then another 10% below the 2017 levels. I was part of a government that did this. We got rid of 55,000 regulations that was a stack about 65 feet tall if you put one of them on each single piece of paper. And we had the most bizarre, obtuse regulations you could ever imagine. I can chat about them later in the cocktail reception if you want. But there was someone that would make you shake your head and you'd think I was just making this stuff up. But it's not just that. You've got the community benefits agreement that is causing all of our public infrastructure to be costing us so much more money and excluding 85% of the businesses in this province, the construction companies, who can't even bid on them. You've got the alignment of building codes in municipalities and provincially that they're heaping costs on the construction industry, which is a large amount of those job losses we had in February and March. It is not one thing, but it's got to be a couple of big things. And if we don't take those big steps, we are not going to get back to where we need to be. Are we going to be right on everything? Of course we won't. Of course we won't. As long as human beings are in government, we're going to make mistakes. But for God's sake, if we don't shoot for the stars, we're not even going to get to the moon. And the trouble in this province is fundamentally flawed. If this was a company, I'd been sold all my shares years ago. And we need to get back to that type of thinking. If we don't have the ambition, we're not going to solve the problems. And my two boys, who are in Toronto, won't come back home. And that is my personal motivation for running for this job. Young engineer, young investment banker, 26 and 24, those jobs used to be here. But if we don't fundamentally change the way our economy works, I'll be flying to Toronto a lot more than I'd like. Thanks.
Caroline.
Yeah, you know, I've seen firsthand some of the challenges with regulation in this province, and one of the things I was acutely aware of when I was a member of the team that saw Site C through the regulatory process and into construction, one of the things that I saw firsthand was how completely burdensome that regulatory process was. You had a 15,000-page environmental impact statement that had to be filed before you could even go start the joint review panel process to find out if you could then even proceed with the project. That's the level we're at. If you're an international investor, you're going to put your money elsewhere just looking at a process like that. The scary thing is that process was before the NDP even came into government. And since then, we've just had more and more and more regulation layered on top. I've seen it firsthand in my own business, advising clients in the natural resource sector and seeing what they're dealing with in a steadily more difficult business environment year after year after year under the NDP. So we're all gonna agree we need to significantly undertake a red tape reduction strategy in this province. It has to happen. But what we also have to do is get the ideology out of what this government is doing. So when you look at something like Clean BC, driven by net zero ideology, no one's even talked about that on the stage. Do you know what the NDP blames all of our economic woes on? Trump's tariffs. If you look at the comparative cost to BC's economy from Clean BC relative to Trump's tariffs, you will see very quickly how much bigger the concern is with Clean BC. $43 billion is the cost. Actually, this is work done by ICBA, who are here today. They published a report that was very informative in this regard. $43 billion is the cost over 4 years of Trump's tariffs and our responding tariffs. $110 billion is the cost of Clean BC. That is within our control. That's the kind of stuff that we need to pull straight out of government. And that's what I talk about. When I'm talking about ideology, I am talking about the economy. We have got to get our economy moving again by scrapping things like Clean BC, scrapping things that are standing in the way of our LNG sector thriving, making sure the conditions are there for LNG Canada Phase 2, but also for LNG up and down the coast as much as we can get, frankly. We need to make sure that they're able to generate the power in the way that they want to proceed with their projects. Clean BC stands in the way of that. This is the kind of ambition we need, not just saying red tape and applying percentages to it, but actually naming the policies we will repeal. I'll start with Clean BC, but I'll go on a lot further from there.
Thank you. Kerry-Lynne?
Well, the reason I'm confident that we can do this here in BC is because I've done it nationally. When I was Minister of National Revenue for 2.5 years and on Treasury Board, and under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, we were coming out of the worst recession since the 1930s. We had debt and a lot of confusion in our national economy, which certainly permeated down through all the provinces. And we had a plan and a focus, debt reduction action plan. We got busy. And with that focus, we were able to lower personal income tax, lower corporate income tax, bring in income splitting for seniors, take the GST from 7% to 5%. Apparently Carney wants to take it back to 7%, he said last week. And we brought in tax-free childcare benefits for the first time, child tax credits, and we got back to balance and a surplus. If I can be part, an integral part of doing that for our nation, I can do it for my province and yours. I know how to do this, but it takes discipline and it takes focus. And we can do it as a team. Everyone has to get involved. All the ministers, all the executive, all the MLAs have to get involved in this so that we know where we're headed. Our 4-pillar industries, agriculture, fisheries, mining, forestry. The NDP are the problem. They are in the way. They are calling them sunset industries. If you declare a fundamental industry sunset and then you go about sunsetting it, it disappears, and that's exactly what's been happening. If you stop construction, a group like ICBA, if you stop them from bidding on government contracts, you're not going to get the best prices. That just stands to reason. If you have ridiculous bureaucracy like Clean BC, where they actually have clean energy coaches, oh, we really need that bureaucracy, don't we? CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, awarded me the Golden Scissors Award because I cut 800 remittances from small businesses. We have to have that kind of focus, regulatory focus, legislative focus. We can do it.
Thank you. Vaughn?
I'm the guy who stands up at the annual budget lockup and asks if there's a plan to balance the budget. And I've actually had the experience of a finance minister laughing in my face when I asked that question. It was perhaps the most candid answer she'd ever given as a finance minister, but she was one of David Eby's long-suffering finance ministers. They don't actually get to do their budgets. Somebody else does it for them. So I'm going to ask the panel. The deficit is $13 billion and change. Then it's 10, then it's 10, then it's 10. And that's if they hit their targets. So it strikes me that if you can't deal with that issue, and it's a tough one, you got to tell people what you're going to cut. I'm going to start by picking on Iain because as I read his financial plan, he starts with at least $7 billion worth of tax cuts on top of a $13 billion deficit existing. That does not sound fiscally prudent to me. So I'll start with you, and I'd like to hear everybody else on the issue too.
Well, I like your arithmetic better. So a couple of thoughts. As a guy who's made his living as a transformative change guy, I take over companies that are hemorrhaging cash. And there's only 2 ways you solve that problem. I've done it 6 times. It's quite literally my expertise. And there's only 2 ways you do that. You have to raise revenues and you have to lower costs. And it's not an either or. You typically have to do both. And depending on the situation, there's a sequencing to go at it. Cutting costs is often the easiest part. You're not wrong in your observation that these guys have built quite a ball of string on how they spend money. But when you see the fact that our public service has increased 45% in terms of the core employees in government and 55% of the broader full public service over the 9-year period, it's literally 210,000 people who are working for the government today, more than who were when the NDP took office. Now, if we had something to show for that, like bridges, hospitals, roads, schools, the fact we get family doctors, the fact we didn't have to wait 18 months for an MRI or a hip replacement, then you could look at that and go, hey, you know, money well spent. But we're not, right? We've got a healthcare system in particular, if I'll zero in on that just for a sec, we've got a healthcare system in particular where for every manager that they've got in Norway of a similar economy, similar population, energy sector, et cetera, for every manager in the healthcare system in Norway, we have 17. Right? And we've got 7 health authorities who don't even have their IT systems coordinated, which, by the way, was started when I was a Minister of Citizen Services 15 years ago. We're talking very basic stuff here. There's all kinds of waste and duplication. You got $1.3 billion alone, by the way, being spent on consultants. Like, pick your lane. Hire more people or hire consultants. You can't do both. These guys have done both. So there's all kinds of little bubbles on that very expensive Christmas tree that very quickly get to the $7 billion that you're talking about. And I know how you got there, by the way. That actually makes this achievable. But it is going to take a couple of years to get there. But we've got to grow the economy. It's not just cutting the costs. And if we don't do a major tax cut, if we don't do regulatory reform, if we don't do some of the major changes in how we invite businesses to invest here, we're not going to grow the pie.
Caroline. Oh, Vaughn, you want to jump in?
No.
Okay. Caroline.
Yeah, and I doubt there's going to be a ton of differences between the way we answer this question, because we are all going to agree that you need to grow the economy on the revenue side to make sure those revenues are there to actually pay for all the services and things that we expect and deserve as British Columbians. But it also involves dealing with the spending side, and it's a significant problem. And we can all point to all the different statistics we want to show what a problem it is, whether it's the 5 public sector jobs being created for every one private sector job, or the growth in the civil service, or the fact that we have 70 vice presidents and presidents in our health authorities relative to 10 in Alberta with a similar size population. Like, we can rattle off all the examples, but the reality is we have to get in there, do a core review of what government is spending and what roles they have expanded by, and make sure we're getting in there and figuring out whether they're actually delivering for British Columbians. It's not going to be, unfortunately, a $13.3 billion line item that we just get to draw a big red X through and move on. We're going to have to find those individual instances of wasted spending, and I will talk to, I've spoken with civil servants myself who actually work in the public sector. I won't name what particular area, but they have vulnerable clients they deal with. They say our number of clients has gone down, but our staff has doubled. And so even civil servants are very worried about it, because they know that there's going to have to be some reeling in that happens. There's also a lot of, quite aside from the wasteful spending and the government bloat and the managers managing managers, there's also all the ideological pet projects this government is proceeding with, like $6.8 million for what they call anti-racism programs, but which are really critical race theory-driven programs that serve their ideological agenda. $2 million for DEI managers. 9 full-time staffers in a in an equity office that spends their time looking at systemic discrimination. These things are all important, but the lens I have for this core review that I want to do has to be delivering for British Columbians. The picture I have in my mind when I think about this is a woman in a grocery store pushing her cart down the aisle, reaching into her cart and putting items back on the shelves that she can't afford to feed her family. If we are taking money from that woman's paycheck, we better be able to show how we're delivering for her.
Kerry-Lynne.
Well, I agree with Caroline on a core review. It's one thing to talk about bringing an economy around, but the truth is we already know the books are going to be far worse than they're telling us, because this is not a transparent or accountable government. Look, they've made changes to FOI, so you can't even find out public information anymore the way you used to. They got rid of the merit commissioner. I mean, these are things that this non-transparent government does. And we have to get in there and really look at what we're dealing with. But once we do, we already know, and I agree, we're probably going to have a lot of, being on the same page here on this one, because we do need to get cost of government down. 55% larger civil service. Do we have 55% greater service from those civil servants? We do not. We have hospital closures. We have people in great need in healthcare being diverted to other hospitals. We have people turned away. We were told emergency departments are closed down. The emergency department closes at 5. You're going to break your leg at 8 for sure. That's just the way life is. This is not acceptable. There are so many examples of a bloated bureaucracy, and we need both sides of it. We need to get to one-stop shop permitting for our mining. We have to stop it where if the government is too slow giving you your extension on your mining permit, that the default goes to government. Who came up with that? Socialists. I mean, this is government overreach, government creep, and it simply doesn't serve British Columbians. We can do so much better, and we will, governing as conservatives who are responsible.
Thanks. Yuri.
I completely agree with Kerry-Lynne's last statement. If we govern as conservatives, we govern from a perspective of smaller government, and we ask the question, does government need to do it at all? And I would say we live in a province where, this is the province where our provincial government sells marijuana. And we've got to be the only organization on the planet that can't make money selling weed. Right? I was knocking on doors in 2024, and a young guy answered the door, and I asked what he did for a living, and he said he worked for the provincial government. And I thought, don't know if this is a conservative voter, but I probed a little more. And so, what do you do for the government, sir? And he said, and this is October of 2024, he said, my job is to work in the Ministry of Health, answering the COVID hotline. And I said, well, COVID's kind of over. And he said, yeah, I haven't had a call in 2.5 years. And I said, but you're still employed? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, so you stare at a blank computer screen all day? And he said, don't be stupid. I've already got another full-time work-from-home job, and I do that all day. And so, you know, we asked the question, can you make these cuts? You know, because we all want to preserve healthcare. We all want to make sure there's great healthcare. But, you know, when you hear stories like that, you realize there is efficiency to be had. You know, my dad was in the Air Force in the 60s, and he used to tell the story that, you know, they got a fuel allotment every month, you know, X thousand gallons of fuel. And if by the end of the month they hadn't used all the fuel, they flew fighter jets to Nova Scotia, loaded them up with lobster for the officers' mess, and flew them back. Well, that's what your government does, right? That is how government budgeting works. And the one thing I want to bring from the private sector is we start with a zero-based budget. We start by asking the question, does it need to be done at all? If it needs to be done, does the government need to do it? If the government needs to do it, can we do it in a way that's more affordable using the private sector? And we need to go through that careful review. And I know we're going to find opportunity in there. And it's not going to be small. It's not $1 million here, $1 million there. It's tens of millions and hundreds of millions that add to billions. And of course, we need to grow our economy. British Columbians have no more tax dollars to give. Absolutely no more tax dollars to give, corporately or individually. So we have to grow the economy to fuel this. And I think the combination of the two, to Iain's well-said point, you win here by growing revenue and decreasing expense. I would say we're going to have to be radical about it. And I know Iain said 5,000 people protesting on the legislature. You know, if it's not 50, then I haven't done my job.
Thanks, Yuri. Peter?
Thank you. Well, I think we have to trust not only the 40,000+ party members in this race, but the broader public to actually have an honest conversation about this topic. The BC Liberals, when they came in 2001, it took 16 years to actually get rid of the structural deficit that they inherited from the NDP. I can tell you as the finance critic for the last 4 years, this structural deficit is about 4 times worse. So we can't sit up here and be like it's a high school presidential race and say we're going to have soda pop coming out of the fountains. You simply can't make the massive cuts you're talking about without actually impacting the core services people want. Healthcare and education is 60% of our budget. 60% in healthcare and in education. That leaves $40 billion left if you're not going to touch healthcare and education. And remember, there's collective agreements in everything. Remember, there's class size, which means you need a certain amount of teachers by Supreme Court ruling per student. You need educational assistance. So it is not as simple. I'm being as honest as I can be because I actually do know what it's going to take because I've been dealing with this in the legislature every day for the last 4 years with that budget document. We could grow GDP twice the rate as we've currently budgeted for GDP growth, and we would still not catch up to the deficit and the debt that we currently have right now. That's a Herculean effort to try to do that. It'll be next to impossible. We need to budget on what the economists are saying would be the average. And David Eby loves to be mediocre, so they keep budgeting on that. They don't even get to the average. We need to budget on that. And we need to I'd be instructing my cabinet ministers, you now need to make that 50%. 50% higher. If it's 1.3 this year, you make it 2% GDP growth. I know BC and other business groups want 3%. They also recognize how hard that would be to go from 1.3 to 3. We have to be realistic about these numbers. We have to be realistic about how long it will take to unwind this. Because there is built-in wage agreements. There is inflationary costs that will hit the budget. It is not a straight line. But you do need the fiscal discipline. You do need to find those cost savings. You do need to actually grow the economy at twice or 50% of the rate of GDP growth that we're budgeting for. And that is how you'll get that extra boost to your bottom line. The NDP this year, Vaughn started off by saying a $13.5 billion deficit. Last year, they told us this year's deficit would be $10 billion. It's now 13.5 when they brought the budget in. Guess what they're saying next year's deficit's going to be? $10 billion. Does anyone believe that's going to be the case? So yes, I know based on Iain's promises, it will be a $25 billion platform that he's put forward of deficit. It is not realistic. We have to be realistic to the voters and the business community. People aren't stupid. They know the challenges we are facing because of the total ineptitude of David Eby and Brenda Bailey as the finance minister. So let's be honest with them. Let's be honest with the business community. Let's be honest that we can actually take tax measures that will grow the economy, revitalize the investment community, get our province growing again on the private sector side, so we actually have jobs being created, so that we actually have a tax base to actually provide the services we all actually want. Because who here actually wants their hospital closed? Exactly. No one else in BC does either. And if you think there's going to be protests around DRIPA, just think back to when the teachers were protesting what happened in this province. What happened? Just magnify that across the public service. We have to be realistic. We can deliver a realistic, tangible way, a path back to balanced budget, and it's going to take year after year after year discipline to actually do that.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, we're at the end. We're not going to get to healthcare or the opioid crisis and so on, but I'm going to give you each 2 minutes for closing remarks about what the party is going to look like under your leadership. But I also hear quite a bit of agreement on many, many issues. How are you going to work together when only one of you wins the leadership? Can you include that in your closing remarks? Yuri, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to dance back and forth down the panel, and then a closing thought from Vaughn.
Yeah, thank you. So, for me, if I'm lucky enough to get this job, I'll consider myself sort of the next steward of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, right? This is a party that's a century old, that got really rebooted and reinvigorated by people like Aaron Gunn and the folks around them who brought this party back to life. And they brought it back to life based on being a grassroots party. And they brought it back to life to be something that they had become, because they had become disillusioned with the BC Liberal United, evolution of that party. So they founded a party on grassroots principles that was fundamentally conservative, that believed in leading life under a conservative banner and conservative values, that believed in smaller government, that believes in freedom, right? And freedom from government overreach, freedom from government oppression. That's why I have the Freedom Charter. That's why it'll be one of the first things I enshrine into legislation, to make sure BC is the freest province in the country. Not just freer, but the freest. We need to make sure we're the Conservative Party that welcomes anybody who wants to live their life under smaller government and under conservative values. So we need to have the door open. We need to ensure that we can win elections. To be the Conservative Party that can't beat the NDP is a fruitless exercise. So we need to make sure that we have dealt with the reality of the world we live in, which is a 1BC polling 10%. Let's not have a revisit of 1972, 1991, 1996, 2017, 2024, where a vote split caused the NDP to win yet again. Let's make sure we don't do that. I am the only candidate who can make that promise today, that we will not split the vote on the right. Let's bring what we know British Columbians are absolutely clamoring for, which is a Conservative Party under conservative values that believes in smaller government, that believes in being fiscally responsible, and wants to deliver the kind of British Columbia that will be the envy of Canada and the envy of the world.
Thank you, Yuri. Iain.
One of the things that makes me really excited about the opportunity of winning this competition is actually the work that lies ahead to become election ready. Again, just drawing on the experience of what I do for a living. Between now and whenever the writ gets dropped, and worst case, it's 2 years out, the role of going across this province and fully constituting all 93 riding associations, finding outstanding candidates, getting fundraising machinery in place that's province-wide, engaging the members in every one of the 93 ridings, that to me it's a ton of work, and it's not glamorous. We're talking church basements and Tim Hortons and people's couches. This is not glitz and glamour, but it's work that I find very, very rewarding. And one of the places where Yuri and I differ is on his 1BC deal, because I honestly believe that the job that I'm applying for is to actually find outstanding candidates in every one of the 93 ridings in this province and find great people that you can run up against David Eby, that you can run up against Nikki Sharma, that you can run up against Ravi Kahlon, or whoever it is they put up against us once David Eby finally exits, and we can set our watches on that one, I suspect. But that's the job I'm applying for. is to build a great party where people see the energy that we're creating, the discipline and the consistency of our value system, and say, I relate to that enough that I want to volunteer. And by the way, I know somebody who might be a great candidate. Let's get him or her into the process and into the conversations. That's the job that lies ahead. And building that it can be energizing and invigorating. And the momentum you get from that is how you win elections. It is not glamorous, but when the momentum starts, it's a lot of fun, and it's how we win. And that's the kind of way I will lead this party should I be successful in this competition.
Kerry-Lynne.
There's a lot we've agreed on today. We've agreed about the need for smaller government, less regulation, less, time to grow our economy, all these kinds of things. We're even agreeing that we need to repeal DRIPA. That's all good stuff. But this election is truly about more than that. And we have to understand that. It is about who we are as British Columbians. It is about the stories we tell about ourselves and our past. It's about having gratitude for the incredible legacy left to us by the people who came before us. People like W.A.C. Bennett and Bill Bennett. We cannot squander that legacy any longer. We have to make the most of our incredible natural resources. We have to make the most of our incredible people, our incredible access to those markets that we talked about right from the beginning. This is our opportunity to do that. But if we are going to do that, it's about starting to stand up for ourselves and saying, we're not ashamed. We're not going to have an education system that teaches shame. We are not going to watch as the NDP and their allies take the symbols of our collective successes as a province, strap them to a flatbed truck and drive them away into warehouses, never to be seen again. This is about more than that. It is about how we see ourselves, build our future, and teach our children pride in who they are, because they have every reason to feel that way. So as much as we have a big job ahead of us, as much as we need to work to unite the party, which we do, as much as we need to work together, which I'm absolutely committed to, as much as we have to grow our appeal to all kinds of different people across a broad range of political views, we have to do all of that. We have ultimately, if we're going to do any of it, we have to win. We have to win by running 93 candidates in 93 ridings, which we're fully capable of doing. Not institutionalizing a divide on the right, as some would plan to do, but actually running those 93 candidates, winning a big, strong conservative government, and building that pride back into being British Columbian, pulling that ideology out from the roots of every corner of the public sector where the NDP has pushed it every step of the way. That is absolutely within our reach. And until we do that, as I said at the very beginning, until we do that, we will have David Eby and his ideologues holding their end of the tug-of-war rope, and we'll just be letting our end fall. It's time to pick up that end, pull really hard, and make sure that we are driving what it is to be British Columbian into the minds of everyone in this great province, so they can stand up and say very, very proudly, we're British Columbians, we're not ashamed, and we'd never be anywhere else in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry-Lynne. Peter?
Thank you. I've ran against a vote split, and I've won against a vote split. It takes a little extra hard work, and it takes a little extra organization, and it takes a little extra volunteers. And that's exactly why you have to build out your riding associations and actually know and have candidates on the ground that know their own communities. Now, West Vancouver Sea to Sky, I don't believe was a vote split last time. Election results matter. The Green Party have official party status right now because that held seat is no longer a held seat. I'm not prepared to concede any seats in this next election. We fight all 93 ridings, and we put our best foot forward, and we target the ones with extra help and support we need to counter vote splits in and around those ridings where a vote split might actually cost you an election. That is how you win elections. That is why I'm 8-0 in general elections. I've never lost from city council to mayor's chair to provincial. It takes hard work. It takes knowing how to connect with the electorate. It takes knowing how to build a team around you. And in the case of a provincial leader, that means building the team in caucus. That means building the team of candidates. That means building the team of riding associations. And that makes sure that the broader public actually can get behind the message that we actually have. And if it's around repealing DRIPA and protecting private property rights and getting our private sector economy going and getting our K-12 education system back headed in the right direction again so our kids are learning the fundamentals, not becoming social justice warriors. If it's around making sure our streets are safer and our healthcare system is getting corrected and actually providing the care people want, anyone sharing those should be voting for the right of center party. And that's the value proposition we have to present to the broader public. That is how we will form government. That is how we get elected. And that is why I've been talking about this whole race. And the 2 polls that have been done with the broader public that asks the simple question, who can form a majority government? I'm the only one in this race that twice now has had that answer come back. Everyone else in this race has come back with an NDP Green coalition government at best, which is what we've had for the last 9 years. We simply can't afford this next election to go to the NDP. It's that simple.
Thank you, Peter. And Kerry-Lynne?
Well, thank you, and I love the energy and passion I'm hearing up here, so I'm going to welcome all 4 of you into my cabinet when I become Premier. Thank you. You know, we have to be bold, and we have to have the energy to make it happen. And, you know, we cannot go back to the playbook of the failed BC Liberal Party or the failed BC United Party, even though at one time I supported the BC Liberal Party. But they kept doing things that didn't work for all British Columbians, voting for DRIPA, voting for SOGI, voting for safe supply, supporting the decriminalization of hard drugs. I had more calls into my office than I ever had before when the BC United, I believe it was BC Liberal, maybe moving into United, maybe they were already United, I'm not sure, the brand kept changing, when they supported the NDP handling of COVID and condemned the Freedom Convoy a year and a half after it was over. That is not opposition. That is not doing your job as legislators. Read the bill, understand the bills, study the bills, and then put your vote forward. That is the kind of discipline we need to go forward. And for me, you know, I have a grand vision, and my vision is that we in BC, once again, will be a powerhouse. We will unleash our God-given natural resources. We will get our permitting so that it makes sense again and people can invest and move forward. We'll get our forestry going again. We've had 31 mills close in 5 years. A fundamental industry of this province. It's not good enough, and we can go in a different direction. There is so much we can do, but under co-governance with a minority group of people is not the future of British Columbia. And we need to understand that. We are going in a very different direction. And when we're a powerhouse, we'll have a Western alliance with Alberta and Saskatchewan. We will take our place again and not be denied in this confederation, including in constitutional change through Section 43. And we will go forward together, powerful, united, Western Canada at its best.
Thank you, Kerry-Lynne. Vaughn, closing thoughts from you.
So you can put together all kinds of policies and platforms. Gordon Campbell came into office in 2001 with a platform of 200 promises. Somebody said at the time, all you have to do is to promise not to be the NDP after the 1990s. He kept most of them. The other thing, though, to me about the job that you're all looking for is a question about leadership and what works and what doesn't. And I think we have a really interesting thing to reflect on because of the dramatic contrast between the current Premier and his predecessor. So you go, they're all New Democrats, right? And there are all these issues on which they agree. But look at the night and day difference on the stuff that really matters about being a Premier. So I've covered 11 Premiers and counting. And that's one every 4 years, and as I said to the current occupant, it's just an average, sir, it's not a prediction. Some of them didn't even serve long enough to win one election, and most of them didn't manage to get themselves reelected. They won an election, they didn't win the next one. 2 of them, however, did. Only one of the 11, though, that I covered was more popular the day he left office than the day he became Premier, and that's Horgan. And if you look at what it was, you come to the differences between him and Eby, and they're showing, I think, is the reason Eby is in political trouble. Horgan, first of all, governed like a team leader, more like a chair of the board. He genuinely delegated to ministers. He genuinely shared credit with them. It doesn't matter what your policies or your ideology or anything is. That's just a style of governing in a big, complicated government like ours, in a big, complicated place like ours. That's something to be thinking about when you're thinking about the team you're going to have. The second thing was, we do have a finance minister, former in the room, who actually balanced the budget. Hi, Carol. It can be done. Horgan did it. You know, you talk to New Democrats about the fiscal mess at the moment. They go, oh, well, you know, you're right-wingers, you know, all of that. No, Jesus, John Horgan balanced the budget every year. He started off by paying off $1 billion in debt. He and Carol James had been through the 90s, and they knew that fiscal mattered. And so they did it. They ran a big deficit in COVID year. Of course they did. That's why you have surpluses. Left a surplus behind. So that's the second thing. But that's a management issue. It isn't just an ideological issue. And I'll wrap it up quickly. The third thing about Horgan is, God, he knew how to apologize when he screwed up. It's going to happen. The Provincial Museum. I was just wetting my lips over the Provincial Museum scandal because this is going to turn into like the Coquihalla or the Fast Ferries. Horgan, 1 month in, calls a press conference. His staff tried to persuade him to take the minister with him. This poor, long-suffering Indigenous woman in Horgan's cabinet, and they wanted her to stand there with him and take the fall for the stupid Provincial Museum, and he wouldn't do it. He did this press conference. It was my mistake alone. I screwed up. I blew it. I didn't. It was the gold standard for apology. Try to get that kind of apology out of David Eby. And the last thing, my friend Norman Spector always reminds me that it's possible that Harold Macmillan never said this, but it's attributed to him so many times that he was asked about why things didn't work out in government, and he said, events, boy. Events, dear boy. You're going to get elected. If you get elected and you get in government and you got your 200-plank platform and your team in place, it's what you didn't expect to come at you that is really going to be the test. And look at Horgan on COVID. I think he got most of it right. He had a lot of help. I think Dr. Bonnie Henry got most of it right. And I realize that may not be that popular a view in this room, but I think it's true. But in any event, he handled it very, very well. He delegated. He didn't meddle in it the way some other provinces, premiers who we could name. And again, look at Eby with DRIPA, right? Nobody expected this to happen with DRIPA. But look at how he's handled it. You know, the 6 positions he's taken just in the last 2 weeks or whatever. So again, that's your last test. Team building, your style of governing, whether you can handle making mistakes, whether you see managing finances in the government as a daily challenge, and then the real test of character, how are you going to handle a thing that nobody imagined coming at you? So there's just some things to think about. And well, let's see if one of you ends up being the 12th premier that I cover. I'm not going anywhere anyway.
Yes, so that is Vaughn signaling to you that when you win the job, get ready to stare down the barrel of his pen. He's going to be watching you closely, and as we know, he will scrutinize you with great diplomacy, shall we say. Thank you to all the candidates for spending this time, allowing us to hear where what your perspectives are, how you plan to govern, what you envision for the province of British Columbia. I applaud you all for stepping up and taking on this challenge, and we look forward to seeing what the result is going to be. Thank you to our audience here in person and to online. We'll be back in a month with another exciting panel talking about one of the issues here today. How do we unleash BC's economy? Until then, good night.
Thank you for tuning into Conversations Live, an Oh Boy Productions program. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find our previous and upcoming episodes at conversationslive.ca. You can also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Again, thank you. I'm Stuart McNish.